When analyzing this game, Peter Spidler said, "Do not try this at home. This is Magnus playing the chess of the future, really. I think I've said this before that he's playing, I think, maybe the best chess of his career. And this game is an example of that. This was at the European Club Cup. His opponent is Anton Korobov, who, as of this game, was rated 2672. I believe he's been over 2700 before, so a strong opponent. Magnus is 2856. So let's jump right in. Magnus has black, Korobov has white. Korobov begins with d4, knight f6, knight f3, d5, and e3, sort of a Kali system, kind of a getting out of theory kind of position. And after the game, Magnus said this is what he likes, particularly as black, when his opponent sort of gets out of theory. Magnus played a6, a very strange move. It's been played before, I guess, to keep a key piece out of b5. b3, obviously, sort of fine kiddo that bishop. Bishop to f5, and essentially he's kind of got a London system reversed here. And bishop to a3. So already a novelty by Korobov. The idea is that if Magnus advances the e-pawn, the bishop will take the bishop, and he'll lose the right to castle. But Magnus says, okay, and he plays e6 anyway. Bishop takes, king takes, bishop e2, and now knight to c6. Again, sort of blocking this pawn at c7, but he's thinking of going knight b4 and then hitting that c2 pawn. It's kind of a Jobava London reversed in a way at this point. Castles, and now h5. Says, I can't castle. The rook is on h8, so I might as well make it useful. So he plays h7, h5 to generate attacking pressure and gain some space on the king's side. A modern concept, for sure. Korobov responds with c4, h4, knight to c3, and now knight to e4, challenging the knight at c3. And Korobov decides to defend the knight. And now rook to h6. Magnus begins to make his rook active. It could come to g6 and pressure g2. He's still got the idea of h3. And Magnus is already at move 11, whipping up quite a bit of kingside pressure. So Korobov takes in the center, clarifies the central situation, and plays knight to d2 to challenge that knight on e4. Perhaps this would have been a good moment to play h3, so that Magnus can't play h3 with his pawn, but instead he plays knight to d2. Knight takes c3, rook takes c3, and queen to d6. The queen is well placed. It can play on either side of the board. It can come to a3, but it can also hit h2. It's aiming at that king side. Queen to c1. Makes it hard for the knight to move because the c7 pawn would fall. But Korobov's main target is going to be that d5 pawn. So he wants to play rook c5, maybe bishop to f3 to put some pressure on that pawn. But it looks like Magnus can defend that pawn and generate more kingside pressure. Magnus plays rook to e8, centralizing his rook. Now bishop to f3, attacking the d5 pawn. Rook to e7, defends the c7 pawn, and now the knight at c6 can move if it needs to. And now rook to c5, aiming at the d5 pawn. And here Magnus plays a very strong move, knight to b4. And the idea is he's threatening b6, and all of a sudden this rook really doesn't have anywhere to go. There's no comfortable square for it to land on. So this is actually a pretty serious threat. Korobov plays knight to c4, which hits the queen. It looks like it's just hanging a knight. But if Magnus takes that knight, then rook takes f5. The pawn is actually pinned laterally. That's why knight to c4 works. But Magnus just moves his queen gently aside. And if you look at Magnus's pieces, they're all well positioned for attack on the king side, except for this knight over here at b4. But this knight does serve a useful purpose. It's attacking the a2 pawn. It can move into d3 at some point. But more importantly, it limits the squares available for this rook on c5. Knight to b2 was played. Perhaps knight to e5 was a bit better here, opening up some pressure, aiming at the c7 pawn. But after knight to b2, Magnus is in total control. First of all, he plays h3. Korobov didn't prevent h3, so now Magnus plays h3 and g3, and here you see all of these weak light squares on white's king side that Magnus can exploit. Knight takes a2, which hits the queen at c1. The queen moves to d2. There was a trap here. Bishop takes d5. Knight takes queen. Bishop takes queen, but now knight to e2 check. saving the knight, and then Magnus would be up a piece. Korobov wouldn't fall for that, but that was a potential trap. Queen to d2. Now bishop to e4. Magnus wants to trade off the one minor piece that is defending these light squares. Bishop e2. Korobov wants to keep it on the board. But now b6. And look at white's rook. There's nowhere it can go. Every single square is covered, and Magnus wins material. Knight goes to a4. Magnus said after this move he was contemplating the move bishop to b1, which I couldn't for the life of me understand. I think the idea is he's clearing the e4 square for the queen to enter in, but he said after looking at it he decided he couldn't make it work. So instead he moves the bishop to h7 to clear the e4 square. The queen wants to come into e4 with a threat of mate at g2. Rook to e1 was played. Queen to e4 immediately, and there's not a whole lot he can do. I suppose he could have played bishop to f1, but that looks really scary after a move like this. You coming in here, yeah, that's scary stuff. So instead he plays f3, but now queen takes e3 check. Magnus is already up an exchange here. No, he isn't. I'm sorry. The rook is still trapped. He hasn't actually captured this rook yet. I'm sorry. Queen takes e3, rook takes e3, and the rook, again, is still trapped, but now the rook takes on c7. So the rook is saved, but doubling on the e-file, pinning the bishop at e2. The king moves to f2 to protect the bishop. And how do we pile pressure onto the pinned piece in this position? That's right, bishop to d3. Piling up, and now that forces the win of an exchange. Bishop takes d3, rook to e1. White plays g4. He wants to give his king some room to run. It's getting a little hot here on f2. So he plays g4, giving the king room to run. Now knight to b4, which hits the bishop at d3. The bishop moves to f5. Rook 1 to e2 check. King to g3. Now rook to d6. Obviously, the rook was under threat, so he had to move it out of the way. Rook goes to b7. g6 kicks the bishop away. Bishop to d7. And now g5. And in this position, Korobov resigned. I mean, this is just amazing, amazing chess from Magnus. The idea is very simple. Knight to d3, f4, and there's nothing to stop rook to g2, check, and mate. And if he plays king takes h3, then he's coming here. Actually, I think this might be better because he's threatening mate this way. And so the only way to save immediate mate would actually be to play f4, but then check, pawn, and you're just winning more material. So just an amazing game for Magnus. If you want to see more great chess from Magnus Carlsen, I have a video I think you're going to want to see. It's right here. I think you're really going to enjoy this video. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.